Following almost 3 weeks of sustained protest, it appears that there is a revolution in the making taking place in Iran. And people worldwide are standing up in solidarity with Iranians who want out from under their brutal regime. So in this video, I will go over what sparked these protests. I will discuss what these protests are about. I will show you video from both within Iran and also worldwide. And at the end of this video, I will get to an important piece of this story that is often being ignored or overlooked. But before I get to all of that, I do want to say this is a story that I have been getting a lot of messages about. I know you could argue I'm a little late to it, but I want people to understand I am one person. I don't have a team. There's no one doing research for me. It's me. I'm the team. So there are going to be stories that I miss or I'm late to. It doesn't mean I don't care about them. It just means that I either can't get to them, don't have time to get to them, I'm focused on other issues, or it means that I will eventually get to it and just give me some time. So I just want you to be aware that yes, I do care about this story. I have followed it, not closely up until now, but I have followed it. But I wanted to find the right way to properly break this down and educate people in a way that is easily digestible for a larger audience, because ultimately that is the aim, for more people to be aware of what is going on here. So these protests were sparked by the death of Jîna Mahsa Amini while in police custody, who was arrested by the literal morality police in Iran for apparently not wearing her hijab properly and possibly wearing pants that were considered to be too tight. Just to give you an idea of how ridiculous the laws are in Iran around dress code. Now, a little more here from The Atlantic. The latest outpouring of rage started on September 16th, triggered by the death of the 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish student Mahsa Amini, who was bundled into a morality police van reportedly for wearing tight trousers. Witnesses say she was violently beaten in the van and later collapsed inside a correction center before being transported to a hospital where she died 3 days later. The protests, led first mostly by women and focused on ending the mandatory wearing of headscarves, have morphed into a national revolt, bringing out men and women, workers and celebrities chanting on university campuses and dancing in the streets, burning hijabs in public in small towns and large cities. So to give you an idea of how just wide-ranging these protests are and how this really, from all I'm reading, is there's sort of a different feel to these protests compared to previous protests. More than some past uprisings against the regime, this one has been remarkably broad-based and inclusive. The affluent residents of North Tehran have come out alongside the poor ones from the city's south side. The youth are there, and so are their parents, even their grandparents. The metropolitan people are out too, and so are the small town folk. So this really is just all-encompassing. People from all over Iran coming out to support these protests and to essentially call for some real changes. Now, since these began, there have been brutal killings of these people that are speaking out, these protesters, at least 154 killed, children included amongst the dead. This is a count as of October 4th, so as of recording this yesterday. I'm sure the number is much higher. Oftentimes, these counts don't account for the entirety of what goes on here, but it gives you an idea of how Iran is trying to push back against this uprising. Now, on the issue of is this a revolution or not, it is worth pointing out here that revolutions are hard to read and their tipping points difficult to anticipate. Who or what replaces a dictator is also a guessing game, which is why regional or international consensus often settles back on the status quo. And as we watch the protests in Iran, it's best not to engage in too much wishful thinking about the potential demise of an Islamic republic that has repeatedly proved its cunningness and willingness to use deadly force to remain in power. Yet even they go on here to write that something feels different about these protests. So again, this is an ongoing story. We will see how this continues, what evolves, what comes out of this. But so far, these are protests that do have a different feel, a different impact than I think protests in Iran in the past have had. Now, I want to show you first, before I get to the new aspect of these protests, the younger people coming out to protest. Before I show you some of those videos, I want to show you what is going on worldwide here, as support across the world over the weekend was displayed from people standing up with Iranians.
Thousands of protesters gathered just north of Toronto, waving flags and holding signs like this one that says, "Free Iran."
It's the fight for justice.
Mirdat Hadi is one of the organizers of this protest. She says people here are frustrated and angry after the death of Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody in Iran after being arrested for allegedly violating the country's compulsory hijab law.
Mahsa is the symbol, but now it's about everybody. This is for Iran and people of Iran.
Protests very similar to this one were held in many other cities across the globe. Thousands more gathered across Canada in cities like Winnipeg and Montreal.
I would feel useless if I weren't here today supporting them and echoing their voice, because they have voice.
There were other massive turnouts in London, Paris, and Madrid, where this woman cut off her hair in protest. She says, "Long live Iran." Some say the movement is already having an impact in Iran.
This is quite powerful, and no matter what happens in the upcoming weeks, things are not going back to normal.
All right, so I'm going to get to some more video from Iran and the protests taking place there and the most recent aspect of those protests. But first here, this was a good report from CBC News on the worldwide protests of people standing up with Iranians. It's worth mentioning that even though these protests are not simply about the hijab, they've evolved into a lot more than that. The hijab was not a mandatory part of the dress code until 1981. So there is a lot of history here that would take, 20 plus minutes to properly break down, with the U.S. overthrowing a democratically elected leader in Mossadegh, and then the revolution that occurred after that, and how, that became more and more extreme. But putting all that aside, it's important to understand that what is happening right now in Iran is an uprising from Iranian people. This is not, the U.S. parachuting in people to try and stir some unrest. No, these are Iranians from all over the country standing up against their brutal regime, and they want to see some real changes. Now, this is where this has evolved to. So you now have high school girls being some of the most outspoken aspects of these protests. So I'm going to read through some of these tweets here, these captions, as I play these videos for you. I think this is the best way to do it. I will link to all of these tweets below the video under sources to properly credit everyone here that is sharing these videos. But let me start with this one. So a girls' school in Iran brought a member of the IRGC-run Basij paramilitary to speak to students. The girls welcomed the speaker by taking off their headscarves and chanting, "Get lost, Basiji." Teenage girls have been at the forefront of protests for days. After unrest at many universities, school protests are now spreading in Iran. In Shiraz, schoolgirls wave their head coverings in the air today, chanting "Death to the dictator" on day 18 of protests over the death of Mahsa Amini. Protesting students chasing away an Iranian official from their school, shouting, "Shame on you." October 3rd, Mahsa Amini. And this one, if we don't unite, they will kill us one by one. Teenage schoolgirls waving their hijabs in the air chant in the city of Karaj, west of Tehran, on October 3rd. So there are many, many more videos. I mean, again, this thread alone, countless videos of these protests. Again, I will link to all these sources below the video if you want to see more. But this is a real uprising. This is, again, the potential for a true revolution here if these continue. But again, it's hard to know with the leadership in place, the regime in place, what it will take to properly have see some changes. But another image here. These are, again, high schoolers giving the middle finger to the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Also worth mentioning here, the protests by the schoolgirls began hours after Ayatollah Khomeini, who has final say on all state matters, broke his silence on the unrest and accused the U.S. and Israel, Iran's archenemies, of orchestrating riots. He also gave his full backing to the security forces, which have responded to the protests with a violent crackdown. So look, it's worth mentioning that, yes, there are accurate criticisms of the West and the role they have played in Iran. And the recent uh, brutal sanctions that have been put in place that have hurt people there even more. That said, you also have to acknowledge that this is a real uprising. You can't just blame the U.S. Ayatollah can't just blame the U.S. and Israel for people in Iran wanting some actual rights. So there are, fair criticisms of the U.S., of course, overthrowing a democratically elected leader. I mean, an obvious criticism there, and how the U.S. has caused a lot of unrest all over the world for decades. But you also can't ignore what is happening in Iran with the Iranians standing up against this regime. Now, Secretary Antony Blinken put this out saying, "We took action today." This is back in September 23rd. "Action today to advance internet freedom and the free flow of information for the Iranian people, issuing a general license to provide them greater access to digital communications to counter the Iranian government's censorship." But as Code Pink points out, for years, the U.S. was restricting access to crucial internet services in Iran, essentially forcing people to rely more heavily on state-run services, which are easily monitored, censored, and blacked out. We're happy to see the sanctions rolled back in the interests of the people. So, and by the way, since then, I believe there's reports that the internet has been shut down in Iran. I'm not sure how accurate that is, if that's still going on, but this sort of step is good, but they shouldn't have had to do this to begin with. There already should have been free flowing of information into Iran. The idea that restricting access to the internet there is going to, hurt the regime? No, it just hurts the people there. So hopefully there is, hopefully this continues, and these, the free flow of information and access to internet continues into Iran without the U.S. going in and restricting it. But AOC tweeting out here, "Solidarity with the courageous women and allies in Iran protesting for their freedom. Mahsa Amini was senselessly murdered by the same patriarchal and autocratic forces repressing women the world over. The right to choose belongs to us all, from hijabs to reproductive care." Bernie Sanders tweeting here, "The Iranian people, led by young women, are demonstrating for their freedom and for a better life. The government has responded by killing dozens of protesters. I call upon the Iranian government to address the needs of their citizens, not kill them." So, of course, many politicians coming out as well in support of Iranians. Now, one last thing. This is a piece of the story that is often being missed or ignored. I think it's worth mentioning. Jîna Mahsa Amini was Kurdish, and that matters. So if you want the full breakdown here from Navarro Media, I will link to this below the video, but I do want to just at least pull out this one paragraph where they write, "Iranian state discrimination against Kurds includes a widespread ban on Kurdish names, which forces many families to register their children officially with non-Kurdish names while maintaining their actual names at home. This in turn fragments the experience of many Kurds and creates an official legal and an unofficial illegal identity. The authentic ethnic cultural identity loses its validity, and a name that says nothing about your roots identifies you." So the Kurdish aspect of this is a whole other piece, but again, if you want to read more about that, check out this piece in Navarro Media. But I will continue keeping an eye on this story, and we are going to see where this all goes, but it is good to see people standing up, fighting for their rights, and the world coming out to support them.